Hi friends, welcome to part 6 of the How to Feed Your Animals Without the Feed Store series. Today we're talking about pigs. Just so you know, I've got timestamps at the bottom so you're free to skip around, and I also wrote an article that you can reference in lieu of a video. In this video, I'm going to talk about how much feed your pigs need, about 3 methods for feeding those pigs, how much your feed costs, how much pork you're going to get per pig, some very simple pig nutrition, and how much space it will take to grow each of those feeds. I'm probably going to drive you crazy if I don't start this video out immediately with the disclaimer that there are 3, maybe 4-ish ways to really feed your pig. Those methods are feeding your animals on pasture, giving them concentrated feed, aka grains, or giving them food byproducts and waste, with the 4th method being a combination of these 3. Near the end of this video, I will circle around to kind of incorporate all of these. But for the majority of the video, we are going to be talking about feeding your animals concentrated feed with no scraps and no foraging. It just makes the most sense to assume that you are only feeding your animals stuff that you grew or hunted, and that you are not feeding them any forage or alfalfa, you're not letting them free range, and you are not feeding them any food byproducts or waste. Once we calculate how much space it takes for that concentrated feed, then we can start making subtractions based on your different options. Now that I've said my piece, let's get into the fun stuff. Whether your pig is 2 pounds or 2,000 pounds, they're going to need 3 to 5% of their body weight per day. That means that a 50-pound pig who just weaned is going to need between 1.5 to 2 pounds daily. A 150-pound pig is going to need 4.5 to 7.5 pounds daily. And a 300-pound pig who's ready for the butcher is going to eat 9 to 15 pounds every day. While most people process their pigs when they're around 300 pounds, that is not the limit to how big they can get. The largest recorded pig, named Big Bill, weighed 2,552 pounds. So even if he only ate 3% of his body weight per day, that is still almost 28,000 pounds every single year to keep that pig going. It's easy to look at those wiener pigs and think the farmers are overcharging for them, but they are not, especially when you factor in how much those parents are eating. Anyway, if a 300-pound pig managed to stay right at 300 pounds for the full year, they would eat right at 5,475 pounds of feed. If you're used to buying those 50-pound feed sacks, you're going to go through about 109 bags of feed per animal per year. Okay, I just started throwing a lot of numbers at you. So this is just a friendly reminder that you can go over to thehomesteaderschronicle.com and look up the How to Grow Everything for Your Pigs article. I always write those articles before I make the videos. And while you're there, you might find some other good articles on the site. That website is a passion project that my friend Kayla and I have put together. So now let's take those numbers I just gave you and use that to figure out about how much it would cost to feed your pigs with the feed store. Oops, I already missed an important step here. There is a very big difference between feeding an adult pig maintenance throughout the whole year and raising a piglet up from weaning to butcher date. I already did the painstaking math of measuring it out day by day for you, so here are the very rough results of that. If you purchase or wean that piglet when he is 1.5 months old or 6 weeks old and has a starting weight of 40 pounds, in your first 30 days of feeding that pig, you are going to pour 100 pounds of feed into that pig. That 100 pounds of feed is going to get him up to 78 pounds body weight. In the second month of feeding that pig, you are going to put 140 pounds into the pig, and he is going to weigh 132 pounds at the end of that. Month 3 will require 174 pounds of feed, and it will get you up to a 193-pound pig. Just in month 4 is going to take 200 pounds of feed, but your pig is going to end up being around 261 pounds. And finally, in those last 15 days of feeding your pig, you are going to go through 116 pounds of feed, but they are finally going to weigh 300 pounds. Now, if you want to get technical and include the feed that was technically filtered through that mother while she was nursing them, that will bump up the feed usage by around 20, maybe 25 pounds, which will very roughly equal 755 pounds to build a 300-pound pig. Now we can take that information and figure out very roughly what it's going to cost you to feed your pig if you decide to feed them through the feed store. In this example, we're going to assume that each feed bag weighs 50 pounds. With that, each growing pork is going to need 15 bags of feed, and each fully mature pig is going to need 109 bags of feed per year. If you find bagged feed for $20 each, you're going to pay $300 per pork or $2,180 per adult. At $30 a bag, it's $450 per pork or $3,270 per adult per year. At 40 a bag, expect to pay $600 per pork or $4,360 per adult per year. A lot of people don't know about this, so I'm mentioning it here, but you can absolutely go direct to a grain farmer and buy feed that way. It's usually a lot cheaper. If you look for it online, it's around $1,200 per tote, which a tote is 1 ton of feed, equal to 2,000 pounds. Buying in bulk like that will get you around $439 per pork or $3,285 per adult. If you're buying by the bag, then you're technically paying for the feed store to store that for you, which means you don't need a clean, dry space to keep that. You don't need to worry about rodents so much. There's just a lot of little things that you don't have to worry about if you're buying it by the bag. Whereas if you're buying it in bulk by a tote or out of a silo, getting a truckload at a time, one, you're going to either need a hopper, a feed bin, a grain bin. Those are kind of expensive to buy up front. And then you need to make sure that it is staying clean and dry. You don't have rodents in there, things like that. By the bag is more expensive but less work, but in bulk can be cheaper, but it does require a bit of special equipment and some know-how. Now that $1,200 a ton is if you buy it online and have it shipped to you. It's usually a lot cheaper if you buy locally. I'm going to use my area as an example. I have found tons for as low as $500 each. So that means here in northwestern Montana at $500 a ton, I could raise my pork for as little as $180 each, or maintain an adult for a year for around $1,350. If you are a brand new homesteader and you've never been exposed to pigs in the first place, I would really recommend that you go pick up 2 or 3 weaners from a farmer direct. Don't go to the sale barn. You don't know what you're going to get there. Nothing wrong with sale barns, but it does take a little bit of experience to pick up something that is healthy and not sick and not going to be just a complete waste of money and a horrible waste of their life. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. So if you're starting out, please just go buy the pig. Don't try to raise them yourselves right off the bat. But if you do want to raise them yourselves and you know what you're doing and you feel confident and you've got someone in your corner who will help you out, you can expect gestation to last around 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. They're probably going to give birth at 3 a.m. That equals around 110 to 120 day long pregnancy. Your pigs are sexually mature at 6 months old, so ironically, around the same time that they're ready to go off to the locker, they could also be kept back as breeding stock. How many piglets they have in a litter ranges like a lot, and I'm going to say 6 to 20, but it can fall outside of that range still. Now, I probably waited way too far into this video to mention this, but for these examples, I am talking about the best pork producers. There are a lot of pig breeds out there that are grazing based in their diet. I don't have a single thing against those pigs, but it takes like 2 years for them to be ready. And a lot of times the people who produce those pigs talk about how they don't need that much in inputs, aka feed, which while they may not need as much grain, they still need pasture and they still need forest and they need land. For one, that's difficult to calculate, and 2, it should still count because that land is not free. Your efforts are not free. I don't consider those to be pigs that just grow off of nothing. So if you're here because you want to have a little grazing pig, I'm sorry, this is the wrong place. Also, there are pigs that aren't meant necessarily for pork. They're more for fat, like the American guinea hog. Those are considerably smaller pigs, but they do a great job of producing a lot of lard. They're not ready quite as fast either. So even though I really love the American guinea hog, I will not be really talking about those in this video. Oh, and all these numbers I have on the screen is very loose, okay? Most people send their pigs off to butcher when they're around 6 months old. That is not as big as they can get. They can get way bigger than that. And when they have their breeders, their producers, they're not trying to get them as big as possible. They're just letting them reproduce. Once they get to a certain size, they're feeding them 3% of their body weight instead of 5%. So we're not seeing the true potential of how big these pigs can get. So these pigs might be able to get much larger than the figures I'm showing you on screen. That is just like a really rough starting point. And as I will probably repeat myself throughout this whole video, I am one person with biases, with limited information. I do not have a special editor or anything. I'm doing everything by myself. I am sure there are going to be errors in here, so please fact check me and do your best to just use this as a starting point and not the end all be all. Another little tidbit of information that's important for you to know for this is that how much feed you're going to get per acre is going to vary a lot based on where you're at and the resources you have on your personal property. For example, my farm in Indiana would have done way better if the tile had some work done on it, and our place in Montana would be in way better condition if I had irrigation so it had more water on it. So for example, the average in Indiana is around 199 bushels of corn per acre, whereas Montana is closer to 80 bushels per acre. California can see as much as 187, while Alaska is down there at 39. The best thing I can say for you to do is, at minimum, look up what it is for your state for the averages, so that way you can get an even closer figure for this. Way better than that, though, is talking to a local grain farmer. I know they're old and they kind of look grouchy, and they might be just a little bit grouchy, but they are probably going to be thrilled that you're taking an interest in agriculture. It might take them a few minutes to warm up to you, but it won't take long. You'll be getting a tour of the farm, and they will be helping you out in ways you didn't even know you could be helped. If you have any ability to make some kind of connection with the local farmers in your area, you should. You absolutely should. Before we can create and formulate a recipe for your pigs, we need to know what they need in the first place, and then work off of it from there. This might sound a little bit precise and scary and perhaps overwhelming. Keep in mind, though, that pigs are uncannily similar to humans. So while there is a very thin margin of where your proteins and where your fats and where your fibers should fall, both as a person and as a pig, people can live pretty decent lives being wildly out of those parameters. Pigs are pretty much the same way, but I am going to do my best to make sure that this is as accurate and as precise as possible. So while pigs can live off of Pop-Tarts and Oreos just like people can, it won't kill them, but yeah, probably not a great quality of life. Doing things as correctly as possible is going to get you more favorable growth rates, and it's going to be a lot more economical than if you're just out here feeding them whatever. First up, let's talk about carbs and crude fiber. If you can digest it, it's a carb, and if you can't, it's a fiber. Both are equally important. Carbs will make up a majority of the calories, while the crude fiber is what makes sure that the body is flowing and there aren't any blockages. Good examples of this for pigs include grasses and hay, wild plants, trees, shrubs, roots, perennials, bran, corn, barley, oats, rye, wheat, millet, sorghum, leafy greens, and leafy vegetables. Now, if you walk out in the nearest field and you grab these things and throw them to your pigs, they may or may not eat them depending on their personalities. Pigs are proven to eat a lot better when their food is very finely chopped. That takes away their ability to be picky with what they eat. I'm not going to get into the crazy specifics of every little minute detail you should do to feed your pigs better, or at least not in this video, but maybe next week or the week after I will put up a video in the intricacies of what you should do to make sure that your pigs are being fed well and efficiently. So look for that. That'll be out around the beginning of April, and this is recorded in 2025, so keep that in mind. Getting into the specifics of it, adult pigs need 4 to 5% fiber, while piglets will need 5 to 7% fiber. As your pig grows up, they're able to better absorb the nutrients from the forage and the fiber, which means they don't need quite as much of it. 3.5 to 6.5% of your pig's diet needs to be fatty acids, and the majority of those should be omega-6 fatty acids. Believe it or not, the type of fat that you put into your pig directly affects the hardness or the softness of the fat that you get from the pig after butchering. I will talk about that in more detail in the next video. Good places to find omega-6s on the farm include corn oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, and canola oil. Or if you want to get that from more wild sources that aren't quite as concentrated, you could look to pumpkin, sunflower, and sesame seeds, acorns, blackberries and raspberries, leaves, and roots. This might be a good time to point out that a lot of farmers make it a point to put their pigs out in places where there are a lot of nuts, like hickory nuts, acorns, almonds, things like that. Some people claim that it tastes really good, whereas others, including my own family, prefers to have a waiting period of like 2 months or so after they've had nuts because they don't like the way that it tastes in the meat. Since my family has always pulled them off of that, specifically away from the hickory nuts, I don't know what that tastes like. So I can't say from personal experience if that really changes the flavor of the meat and fat or not. Now for your omega-3s on the farm, you can look to flaxseed oils, chia seeds, soybeans, dairy products, whereas in the wild you can find them in walnuts, grasses and vegetation, your weeds, worms and insects like beetles, larvae, and ants, meat, and from fresh kills or decaying animals, fish, especially salmon and oysters, eggs, aquatic plants, especially algae. Wild hogs will do quite a bit of digging around in streams and creek beds looking for algae specifically. Pigs need anywhere from 14 to 18% protein. Most of your piglets fall in that 16 to 18% range. Most adult pigs are in the 14% range. Even your pregnant and lactating sows can often fall in that 14% range. However, if you notice any kind of a drop-off or if she's having really large litters, you might want to bump it up to 16% protein. Good sources of this include alfalfa, grass hay, soybeans, meats, and parsley, surprisingly. Soybean meal is one of the best, most affordable proteins out there, which is why it's used so often in the pork industry. I know some people have their reservations about soybeans and soybean meal. I do not. I have an article on why I think that soybeans and other grains are good for people and good for animals. With that said, if you are leery of it, I want to respect that canola oil or canola meal is a good alternative. If that's not your thing either, you're going to need to go really heavy on the meats, really heavy on the bones. Fish meal might be more of your friend too. That gets prohibitively expensive for most people, but if that's an option for you and you really want to avoid that type of crop, you can. Minerals are important for growing bones, electrolyte balance, and to avoid serious illnesses or deficiencies, aka keeping that immune system up. I highly recommend that you check out the accompanying article that goes along with this because I get into a little bit more detail on each of those things there. If you want to source these minerals from a more natural place, you can look in wild forages, alfalfa, leafy greens, especially the younger plants, meats, fungi, grass hay, saplings, ash, sprouts, and some water sources. I am not going to read this next little section to you, so if you are doing something else and just casually listening, now might be the time to stop what you're doing, come over, check this out for just a second. This section might be worth taking some notes on. And if you want to keep these numbers, I highly recommend taking a screenshot or taking some notes. I will have a PDF download available really soon. Stick around to the end of the video to see more about that or check out the description. Vitamins are really important because they let your body use the carbs, fats, and protein. It is completely possible to have enough of the carbs, fat, and protein and still have a deficiency just because you don't have the vitamins to be able to actually use them. Pigs need vitamins A, B, C, D, E, and K. They can make their own vitamin B and I believe their own vitamin C if their diet is balanced. Most of the vitamins they need will be found in wild forages, leafy greens, vegetables, grains, including cereal grains, seeds, fruits, legumes, and sprouts. Now that you've got down the very basics of what your pigs need to eat, we can go through and formulate a feed for them. There are literally billions of different possibilities here, so I just had to pick one and move on with it. We don't want a ton of ingredients because that is way more difficult to farm, and we want to try to use things that have the most complete proteins and the most complete balance of all the nutrients that they need. Corn and soybean meal fills in most of the gaps by themselves. They really complete each other very well. And then after that, we are substituting in bone meal or fish meal and sugar beets. If you do not like this formulation I have come up with, I completely understand that. Make sure you check out the Clemson EDU feed stuff calculator. I'm going to put that into the description. I did not have that when I was formulating the chicken and rabbit videos, maybe not the goat too. So I was doing all of these calculations by hand on pen and paper, and that was ridiculously difficult. So be sure to check out that calculator, play with it a little bit, see what is most easy for you to work with, and don't be afraid to make these formulations your own. The nutritional profile of this blend is about 17.7% protein, 4.4% fat, and 2.4% fiber. We know that we need 733 pounds of feed for each pork animal, and we know that 75% of their diet is going to be corn. From that, we can figure out that we need 549 pounds of corn per growing pork. If you're doing your traditional row cropping, either by hand or by tractor, or mule or ox, the national average of corn yield is going to be around 4.5 tons per acre, so you will need around 1/10 of an acre per pig. Now, if you want to get into square foot gardening where you can technically plant 4 corn plants per square foot, then you only need 150 square feet. A lot of people do not use this method because you cannot really use machinery and there's going to need to be a lot of inputs like extra fertilizer and usually extra water to keep this going. Soybean meal is not plain soybeans. It is not just soybeans that have been crushed up. These are soybeans that have basically had the oil extruded from them. So you can grow your soybeans, you can take them off to your local feed mill, They can extrude the oil, make their oil, whatever. You get back what's left over, which is your soybean meal. It is much lower in fat. It is also lower in protein. Now, I know that might sound bad, but plain whole soybeans in large quantities will give your cattle and your pigs and anything else a lot of diarrhea. So this is not a bad thing that has been extruded. You can get a paycheck from the work that you put in and still be able to feed your animals, even though you've profited off of that crop. You can get around 6,000 pounds of soybeans per acre. When you do soybean meal and you've had half of that taken away, it's more like 3,000 pounds of soybeans per acre. And since we need 146 pounds per growing pork, it's going to be around 4,094 square feet. Now, I can't tell you how much land it takes to grow bone or fish meal, but I can tell you that about 12% of a deer's body weight is bone. So if you tag a 200-pound deer, you're going to get around 24 pounds of bone, which is more than enough to cover your pig's needs from birth up to butcher date. A 120-pound deer has 14 pounds of bones. A 15 to 20% of a steer's carcass weight is bone, so a 1,200-pound beef is going to give you 120 to 240 pounds of bones. Chickens are 20 to 25% bone, so an 8-pound chicken has around 2 pounds of bone. And finally, rabbits are 8% bone, meaning that a 10-pound rabbit has almost a pound of bone. If you have other livestock pursuits going on, this is going to be a pretty easy gap to fill. If not, make friends with a local farmer, a local rancher, some hunters, or go down to your local processor and see if maybe they can help you out. Each pig needs around 15 pounds of bone or fish meal. Now that is a dry, dehydrated weight. So if you are pulling a fish out of the water, you need 4 times as much fish as if it was already dehydrated and ground up and given to your pig. So you either give them 1 pound of fish meal or 4 pounds of fresh fish. Around 60% of the sugar produced in the U.S. comes from sugar beets, not sugar cane. That's because it is very space efficient and easy to grow, which will serve you really well when it's time to grow feed for your pigs. You need about 22 pounds of it per growing pork, and since sugar beets will usually yield almost 30 tons per acre, you only need 16 square feet per pig. Well, we did all the calculations, and in total, you need about 9,424 square feet per pig if you're row cropping, or 4,260 square feet per pig if you are square foot gardening that corn. Pigs are social creatures, and even if you are butchering them, they deserve to have a good quality of life. Don't keep them alone. So if you are raising a pair of them, you only need 20 to 40% of an acre to grow all the feed they need from weaning to butcher date. Ultimately, this means that 1 acre can support 4 to 10 pigs from weaning to butcher date. Now, I want to say, if you have never used the square foot gardening method and you do not know how labor intensive that is, I'm going to say skip that. Don't rely on that. Don't expect that to be what actually happens, because you're probably going to need to bring in outside help to manage that because it is very labor intensive. But it is an option, so I wanted to make sure you knew about it. I told you we'd eventually circle around to the other 2 to 3-ish methods of feeding your pigs. You can put your pigs out on pasture or out in the forest, and they will forage for a lot of their feed. They do burn more calories this way, but they are also able to provide some of their feed this way, so depending on your climate, they're probably going to come out a little bit ahead here. The downside to this that a lot of people don't talk about is how much you need to rotationally move them, so that way they're not completely destroying the area that you've put them in. Pigs are great at rooting up and removing stumps and weeds and little saplings, but also fully mature trees and fences. They can be stinky and they can be extremely destructive if you are not managing them well, and it is pretty difficult for someone new to manage them correctly right off the bat. If you do pasture pork correctly, it is just phenomenal and it is a work of art to see. And if you do it wrong, it will turn you off from pigs for the rest of your life. Also, there are people out there who are feeding their pigs 100% off of scraps, and they don't seem to be having any trouble whatsoever. If you can find a food bank that once the food is too expired to give to people, they can give it to you, that's a great option. Bakeries will throw out stuff that is wasted. Restaurants will throw out waste. A lot of breweries have leftover yeast, like brewers grains. So there's spent grains that you can pick up. The problem with those is they are spent, so the nutrients and the goodness in those has already been extracted. So there are calories in them. It's just not quite as nutritionally dense as I would like to have. That said, extra food is wonderful and it's eco-friendly and it's certainly economical. If you can get your friends and neighbors to save their scraps for you, you can throw those to the pigs as well. That's a wonderful thing to do. But for the sake of giving you the best and most helpful information, I'm going to say to limit how much scraps you give to your pigs. Cap it at maybe 30% of their diet. This is for their safety and also just so that way you can kind of get a good rein on things. Also, if you are raising pigs with the intention of keeping one for yourself and then selling the other pig or pigs, you really need to check the laws on scraps and food byproducts in your state, because some states have outright prohibited the use of food scraps entirely. Other states aren't quite as strict, but you do need special licenses or permits to do that. So make sure you look into those things before you get into the pigs, so that way you have a really clear plan of action. But yeah, if you can feed your pigs on the pasture and maybe reduce their feed by 10%, then they need 10% less land to grow their feed. And if you can give them 30% of their diet scraps, then you can reduce that by another 30% of the total land needed to grow their feed. It really does add up pretty quickly, even though pigs are efficient enough as they're growing. If this is your first time seeing a video from me, I've already covered this on chickens, rabbits, goats, beef and dairy cattle, and now pigs. So if you like this video, be on the lookout for those. Before you go, I wanted to say thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. That is extremely helpful with the algorithm, so thank you for that. Also, I have been working on a guide, I guess you could call it, for the How to Feed Your Animals Without the Feed Store series. Basically, I have taken everything from the article and everything from the video and combined it into one PDF. So if you took notes, you do not need this. If you want all of my sketches and you want all those infographics with all the text, like all right there together in a downloadable, easy to reference guide, then this is going to be pretty helpful for you. Excuse the breakfast mess, but this is what it looks like. It's on the homesteaderschronicle.com. This is a website that Kayla and I made ourselves. It is AI free. It is just a passion project of ours. Anyway, the guide is $10. I will be creating these guides for all the other animals, and after you buy 3 of them, every guide after that is going to be completely free. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that yet, but I will make sure there's some sort of like a discount code, so that way everything after 3 is free for you. Please don't feel like you have to buy from me, but if you do, that makes it so much easier for me to dedicate time to making these videos and making these guides for you. The article is free, the video is free. If you want the notes done for you, that is $10. And like I said, extremely helpful to me, so I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next video.